Amud Yomi. Amud Yomi means the side of the day. In the Talmud, there's something called a daf. A daf is a page, and an amud is a page. But a daf is a page with two sides, and an amud is a side. So in English, you have the word page, and it can mean double-sided or one side, but amud means only one side. And this is a new series that I started called Amud Yomi. Some people do it. Some people, I'm not the first one to come up with this, but this is my own series of Amud Yomi. And it's different every day. It doesn't follow a sequential order. It's determined by, you might say, chance. And what I mean by that is, if I go into a shul and I see somebody learning a Gemara, and he happens to be in, let's just say Bava Batra 83b, then that's what I'll learn. That will be the Amud. And so it's interesting because it's a different thing every day. It's like there's no, in a way, there's no continuity. But I'm actually doing this as an experiment to see if, in the greater picture, the bigger picture, there is some continuity over time. If I can notice some patterns within chance. Well, we call it chance, but really it's just I consider it min hashemayim, from heaven, and take that as far as you want to take that. So, at any rate, today's Amud is in Tractate Bava Kama, page 91a. And starting from the top, the word Alma. Alma ba'inan umdina devedina. Yake v'negama dedina kadala lama sheinan le. Ale umdina devedina belama inan le dina. Rava continues the report in their name. So, as you can imagine, it's going to come, sometimes it will seem out of context. It comes in the middle of something. Sometimes I'll go back, and sometimes I won't. So today I'm just coming right in the middle of something. So whatever it is, we'll find out eventually. Rava continues the report in their name. Who? I don't know. But, okay. Apparently, we require the evaluation of the court in order to render him... Oh, before I continue, just one more thing. The idea of this whole thing is really an extension of my work in Gematriona, where the idea of Gematriona is you come into any situation, any context, any subject, and you come right in the middle of it. And then you have to go with what you're given. It doesn't make a difference if it's connected or not connected to what happened before it. And you have to make something of it and make sense of it where you are right now. Kind of like in a dream. Someone once mentioned this to me, that when you have a dream, at night, you can remember, when you wake up in the morning, you remember your dream, but can you think about it? Can you remember when your dream started? You just sort of found yourself in it. You remember what happened in the dream, but I can't speak for everybody. Maybe some people go to sleep at night and they have a dream, and then the screen comes on and says, "Now your dream is starting," and the credits come up, and then the opening credits and all those other cool things they do in the openings of movies, and then you have your dream. I wonder if someone has a dream. If someone had a dream like that, please let me know. I'd be interested in hearing that. But I think for most people, when you go into a dream, you just find yourself in it, and you can remember the events that happened in it, but it's hard to remember what the starting point was. So that's what this is all about. It's coming into an Amud in the middle of something, and you get into that reality. And it's a continuum. It's a part of someone else's continuum. They have been learning this. Someone who's learning the Talmud in a synagogue or in a yeshiva or something. Chances are they've been learning the past few pages. They know what it's about. I highly do not think that they do what I do. They just learn a random thing by itself. But anyway, with that said, this is where we are. Rava continues the report in their name. Apparently, we require the evaluation of the court in order to render him liable to pay for the damage. And with regard to this ox it killed, once the verdict was given that it be put to death, we do not delay the implementation of the verdict in order to wait for the evaluation of the court, and we do not delay its judgment. Therefore, the monetary case is not judged. And I, Rava, said to the sages of the school of Rav, even if you say that this halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who does not require assessment by the court, one could explain that here we are dealing with a case where the owner of the ox fled. A hit and run, I guess you might say. It's a gore and run, maybe. And the court cannot judge his case in his absence and cannot render him liable to pay for the damage caused by his ox. The Gemara asks, if the bride is discussing a case where the owner fled, then in the case where they did not judge it as a case of capital law, how does the court judge it as a case of monetary law without the owner of the ox being present? The Gemara answers, the bride is discussing a case where the court accepted the testimony of the witnesses and the presence of the owner, and he subsequently fled. Sof sof behecha mishtaleb meridia ihachitam nidahine dine mamenos bereshev nishtalam meridia piada nidaina dine nefashos nidaine dine nefashos. The Gemara asks, ultimately, from where are the damages paid in a situation where the owner fled, as he is not here to pay the damages? The Gemara answers, they are paid from plowing. The ox is rented out to plow fields, and fees are generated. And the fees generated are used to pay the damages. Afterward, the ox is judged for the killing as a case of capital law. The Gemara asks, if so, with regard to an innocuous ox, if so, with regard to an innocuous ox, why did the bride to rule that the court does not judge it as a case of monetary law? The court should judge it as a case of monetary law first, and the damage will be paid from fees generated from renting out an animal for plowing, and then the court should judge it as a case of capital law. Amar Rav Mari bered Rav Kahanem Zoisoi Meres Ridio Aliyo Dimohu. Rav Mari, son of Rav Kahana, said, in answer to this last question, that is to say that the money gained from plowing is considered like the superior quality property of its owner. In other words, that money is like the rest of the owner's estate and is not considered to be part of the value of the ox itself, since payment for damage caused by an innocuous ox is taken only from the value of an ox itself. It follows that money received from renting out the ox to plow cannot be used to pay damages. Ein oimed in connection with the ruling of the Braita that the court must assess whether the death can be attributed directly to the action of the assailant. The Gemara notes a dilemma was raised before the sages. Is there an evaluation performed with regard to damage as well, to determine whether the act was sufficient to inflict the damage? Or is there no evaluation performed with regard to damage, Mi amurim lakad lehu damdinan. Diachin nav kinishama v'hailo nav kinishama. Avanizakin kol dehu. Oidin melo ishno. Do we say that specifically in the case of killing is where we perform an evaluation, the assessment to determine whether a soul departs with this assault and the assailant will be held liable, or whether this soul does not depart with this assault and the death is attributed to other factors. But in the case of damage, perhaps we say that he is liable for whatever cause of damage, or perhaps there's no difference between the two. And with regard to damage as well, the court evaluates whether the act was sufficient to inflict that damage, and if it was not, he will be exempt. Toshima ma boyo שיש בו כדי להומיס עשרות טפוחים אף כל שיש בו כדי להומיס עשרות טפוחים היו פחותים מעשרות טפוחים ונפל לצורך שור או חמור ומייס פוטל who's like boy chayil. The Gemara says, come in here, proof from what was taught in the Mishnah 50b concerning the halachot of a pit. Just as a pit that has sufficient depth to cause death when falling into it is at least 10 handbreadths deep, so too any other excavations that have sufficient depth to cause death may be no less than 10 handbreadths. If any of the types of excavations were less than 10 handbreadths deep, and an ox or a donkey fell into one of them and died, the nigger of the excavation is exempt. But if it was injured in it, but he did not die, he is liable to pay damages. My love. What? Is it not the case that the Mishnah is counting the handbreadths from below to above? And this is what he is saying. From 1 handbreadth deep until 10 handbreadths deep, there is no liability for death, but there is liability for damage. Apparently, with regard to damage, he is liable for whatever cause of damage. Even a fall into an excavation having the depth of 1 handbreadth. Learn from the Mishnah that the court does not perform an evaluation with regard to damage. Lo mimale l'matach roshiv yochi kamal asar misayinko pachas misarapota nizokin isa misaleko ulioilam emelach yeshar meleni zakin chol midei winip kiechad dimastak demistazka be'einan. The Gemara rejects this. No, the Mishnah is counting from above to below. And this is what it is saying. If the excavation is 10 handbreadths deep, then there is liability for death. If the excavation is slightly less than 10, there is liability for damage, but there is no liability for death. And actually, I will say to you that there is an evaluation performed for damage, and for each and every circumstance. We require that there be conditions whereby the injured party could reasonably be damaged by whatever caused the damage. Toshima, come in here. Huko aleina besimo alazo mecheresho even yoitzi boel acherus keneged einoi v'ina oye keneged ozno v'ina shemea ein eved yoitzi boel acherus my time elav shum nevenen umdena ushma mina yeshum nena lezakin lai. The Gemara suggests another proof. Come in here, a proof from what is taught in a Braita, Tosefta 9:26. If a slave owner struck his Canaanite slave on his eye and blinded him, or on his ear and deafened him, the slave is emancipated by means of these wounds. If he struck near his eye, and as a result he doesn't see, or near his ear, and he does not hear, the slave is not emancipated by means of these wounds. What is the reason that the slave is not emancipated? Isn't it due to the fact that we required evaluation of the damage? And in such a case, the assumption is that the owner's action did not suffice to cause the injury, and learn from the Brayta that there is an evaluation performed with regard to damage. Lo, mishum de'amrinon, mishum de'amrinon, lai 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 lai. Okay, let's continue. If a slave owner struck his Canaanite slave on his eye and blinded him on his ear and heaven, and the slave was a man's a bit of a means of his wounds if he struck his near his eye. Oh, we did this already. What is the reason it's not a man? Isn't it due to the fact that we require an evaluation of the damage? And in such a case, the assumption is that the owner's action did not suffice to cause the injury, and learn from the Brayta that there is an evaluation performed with regard to the damage. Lo, mishum damrin. Hadi boys now shaking the Tanyo. Hamabi says Chavei Rai Patul Midini Adam. V'chai B'din Shemayim. Ketzad. Talk about the Necher Shloi Patul. Achuzoi v'talk about the Necher Shechal. The Gemara rejects this. No. The slave is not emancipated because we say that it is possible that it was the slave who frightened himself, resulting in his blindness or deafness, but it was not the actual strike that caused it. An injury can result from being frightened, as it is taught in a Brayta of Sefta 6:16. One who frightens another and thereby causes him injury is exempt according to human laws, but liable according to the laws of heaven also. If one shouted into another's ear and deafened him, he is exempt according to human laws, but liable according to the laws of heaven. But if he held him and shouted into his ear and deafened him, he is liable according to human laws as well, as he physically took a hold of him. Tashima, come in here. Another proof from a Brayta. Okay? It's Sefta 9:3. Chamisha devam do noise of noise and lam yad ripoy v'shavas ad shetischa peyamdu behaya kimis naveh v'choylech hey noisin loy ela kemoshiam do. The Gemara suggests another proof. Come in here a proof from what was taught in a Brayta, it's Sefta 9:3, with regard to the 5 types of indemnity that one who injures another must pay. The court evaluates the victim as to the value of the damage that he suffered, and the assailant gives his payment to him immediately. Payment for medical costs and loss of livelihood is evaluated from the moment of injury until he is healed. If the court evaluated that a certain sum would be needed to pay for his medical costs and loss of livelihood, and subsequently the victim's condition began progressively deteriorating, and the sum proved to be inadequate, they gave him payment only as they had evaluated him. Amdu, he would even noisen like all mashim do, Shmamina. Yehoshua Zokin, Lemehmad Gavo, Kamiktsal, Hamakamaka, Lomiktsal, Lokum Boylan, Divada Yabrinan, Amdinan. Ki come boilan le memad chefza iabidhai niskalomai. The Brayta continues. If they evaluated him as requiring a certain sum for medical costs and loss of livelihood, and he healed sooner than expected, they nevertheless give him the entire sum as they evaluated him. Learn from the Brayta that there is an evaluation performed with regard to damage. The Gemara clarifies with regard to evaluating an injured man to determine how long he will suffer from his injury and how long he will not suffer. We do not raise a dilemma, since it is obvious that we certainly evaluate this element. When we raise the dilemma of whether the court performed an evaluation or not, it is regard to evaluating an item, meaning determine if it is capable of causing this damage or if it is not capable of causing this damage with regard to this issue. What is the halacha? Tashima Shimunatim Yomer. Remember when I met Rabbi Yehoshua Cohen for the first time? I think it was the first time. I think I talked to him about Shimon HaTimni. Yes. Shimon HaTimni. Tashima Shimon HaTimni Omer. My Grav Miyuchad. Shema Soledo Leidim. Akol. Yuchad Shema Soledo Leidim. Shema Minoye Shoim Yan Zakin. Shemamina. Shimon the Timnah. Yeah, he had a whole small shas, a pocket shas. You know, those tiny little things, and he brought out Beitza 21. Either 21 or 21A or 21B, I forgot. But he read something about Shimon Timni. Because he also came up in Yevamot, I think, somewhere. But anyway, yeah. Alright, let's continue. The Gemara suggests coming here a proof from what was taught in a Brian Tetrasefta Sanhedrin 12:3. Shimon Timni says, just as a fist is unique in that is submitted to the assembly of judges to assess its ability to injure any witnesses who attest that this was first used to strike, so too a ruling can be issued. In the case of any item that is submitted to the assembly of judges to identify its ability to injure, and to the witnesses who attest that this was the item used to strike, learn from the Braita that there is an evaluation performed with regard to damage. The Gemara affirms, learn from the Braita that this is so. Shemamina? Shtaka learn? Yep. Excuse me for one moment. For possibly a few moments. Ay. Continuing back with Amar Mahar. Vaitel. Omama. Amdu v'hivri. Noistino kol ma shemdu misayel el arove. Yom rava hayman. Yomdu nechuli yom esva itpach. Lipal vid yom ka'avel aviditam. Yavina lechul yama min Shemaya. Lechul yama min Shemaya hu drachme. Or drachimu alam. The master said above, if they evaluated him as requiring a certain sum for medical costs and cost of livelihood, and he healed sooner than expected, they nevertheless gave him the entire sum as they had evaluated him. This supports the opinion of Rava, as Rava said, with regard to this man whom they evaluated, concluding that he would not be able to perform labor for the entire day, and his wounds healed at midday, and he was performing labor. We give him compensation for the entire day. The injury was one that would generally cause a man not to be able to perform labor for an entire day, and it was from heaven that they had compassion on him and healed him sooner. This does not affect the liability of the one who caused the damage. Rakak. V'giyav harok. Be'evir kole amar papa. Lo yishanu el boi. Ela b'vigdola. B'newe b'yesh advarim. The Mishnah teaches in 98, if he spat upon him and his spittle reached him, or if he removed another's cloak, he must give the injured party 400 dinars. Rav Papa said they taught this halacha only in the case where the spittle reached him, but if the spittle landed on his clothing without touching him, he is not required to pay him. The Gemara asks, why not? Let it be like one who humiliated another with words. Amri b'marav b'shmei d'ravat yosi b'ravin zoysemeres b'aishoy b'nivalim patam b'klum. The Gemara answers, in the West, in Eretz Israel, they say in the name of Yossi Ravin, that is to say that if he humiliated another with words alone, he's exempt from paying anything, although he will be held accountable by heaven for his sin. Okay, Hakol lefi choydei. Ibailu tanakam lekuli al kamar or lechum kamar. Lekul kamar di ikani di lo ba'i mimishkal kulehai. Vaidin lechum kamar di ka'ashir va'ilu mitav letvei. The Mishnah teaches with regard to the assessment of payment for humiliation, it is all assessed in accordance with the honor of the one who was humiliated. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Does the first line in the Mishnah say his opinion as a leniency, or does he say his opinion as a stringency? The Gemara explains the two possibilities. He says his opinion as a leniency, teaching that there is a poor person who doesn't need to take so much payment for humiliation, as detailed in the fixed sums of the Mishnah. Or perhaps he says his opinion as a stringency, teaching that there is a rich person whom the assailant needs to give him more than those fixed sums. Tashima. The Gemara suggests coming here proof from that which Rabbi Akiva says in the Mishnah. Even with regard to the poor of the Jewish people, they are viewed as though they were free men who lost their property and were impoverished, and their humiliation is calculated according to the status, as they are the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and are all of prominent lineage. Conclude from Rabbi Akiva's statement that the first Tana says his opinion has a leniency, meaning that while the first Tana states that the principle that payment for humiliation is in accordance with the honor of the one who was humiliated, and therefore a poor person will receive less than the fixed sums listed in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva responds that even a poor man is deserving of those fixed sums by virtue of his esteemed lineage. The Gemara affirms, conclude from the Mishnah that this is so. Okay. The Mishnah relates an incident occurred involving one who uncovered the head of a woman in the marketplace. The woman came before her. Rabbi Akiva was requested he assessed payment for the humiliation that she suffered, and Rabbi Akiva obligated the sale to give her 400 dinars. The man says, Rabbi Akiva, my teacher, give me time, pay the penalty. And Rabbi Akiva gave him time. The Gemara asks, but do we give time for an assailant to pay compensation? But doesn't Rabbi Akiva say the court does not give one time to provide payment for injuries? He must pay compensation immediately. The more answers when we do not give him time to pay compensation, it is specifically with regard to injury, as he caused a monetary loss by inflicting physical damage on the victim. But with regard to humiliation, where he did not cause him monetary loss, we do give him time to pay compensation. The Mishnah relates that the man then waited for her until she was standing by the opening of her courtyard and caused her to uncover her own head. How did he do that? Rabbi Akiva said that although she caused injury to herself, which is not permitted, this does not negate the man's requirement to pay her compensation. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in the Braita that Rabbi Akiva, how did he do that exactly? It doesn't say. The Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in the Braita that Rabbi Akiva said to him, you plunged into mighty waters and you raised nothing more than worthless earthenware in your hand, since it is permitted for a person to injure themselves. This contradicts the Mishnah's account of Rabbi Akiva's opinion. The Gemara answers, Rava said, it is not difficult here in the Mishnah where it states that one may not injure himself is with regard to inflicting actual physical injury. Whereas there in the Braita it states is permitted for one to where it states that it is permitted, it's with regard to humiliation that a person is allowed to humiliate oneself. The Gemara asks, but the ruling of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah is stated with regard to causing humiliation. Just to finish the idea, we'll turn to time on B. The Ketanya Chavivli asked me Alpha B Shin the Shaipat, so Hakikama, let me buy Baishis. Yamashan Baishis last me, Pino, Gavaladin, and Damashai, it teaches with regard to one who injures oneself, although it is not permitted for him to do so, he is nevertheless exempt for any part penalty, indicating that the prohibition is in effect even with regard to humiliation. The Gemara answers, this is what Rabbi Akiva said to the man, it is not necessary to say with regard to humiliation, where it is permitted for a person to humiliate himself, and that someone else who humiliated him is liable, but even with regard to injury, where it is not permitted for a person to injure himself, others who injured him are liable. Alright, we'll stop here.